the podcast with me, Simon.
And me, Dominic.
There we go. I, first of all, in the last hour, as we're recording this, I just got back from Leicester, that lovely, lovely shithole in the East Midlands. And
very diplomatic. I've heard you've had quite an eclectic weekend.
I had a lovely weekend. I was at the Regional East Midlands Labour Party conference. First of all, there was a gala dinner the night before. Soup was pretty good.
The absolute totem of socialism, gala dinners.
Oh my god, that was the one thing I kept on saying on the day afterwards. Reform's regional conference was cheaper. It's £11 to go to a Reform conference. You know how much it was for Labour Party, right?
Lie to me.
Gala dinner, £60. The actual conference, £40. It was £100 to go to this Labour thing.
I thought we were getting this food for Waitrose or something.
I thought we were meant to be champions of the working class. Like, what the fuck's this about? But then, no, and then we ended up. There was soup. Soup was good. Then there was some questionable chicken, rather dry, and then there was. But then my mom who didn't want to risk a meat option because it's weird. She doesn't eat anything with 4 legs, right? So she got a veggie option. The veggie option was gnocchi, and the gnocchi was much nicer than the chicken. And then finally there was some lemon tart, which was fine. But the key thing about the gala dinner was the speakers that we met. And so the first speaker we had was Liz Kendall, I think her name is, who's the Secretary of Work and Pensions, I believe. And she didn't really have anything to say specifically. A lot of hers was just along the lines of, "Thanks for the win, guys. We'll keep winning." Like a Donald Trump one where it's like, "Mr. President, we'll get tired of winning." Then what else was there? Then there was the Then there was Heidi Alexander, who's the newest Transport Secretary in a series of a few. And I remember she talked about trying to reform the bus service, and the bus service was bad, especially for young people and for the elderly who can't drive. And then there was the and then I personally spoke to her afterwards about nationalising the railways and how people use Northern Rail, one of the most famous nationalised railways, and also one of the famous and the most shit ones, as an excuse to not nationalise the railways. And she said, well, first of all, the Northern Rail was worse when it was privatised and had to be nationalised underneath the Tories because it was that bad. And secondly, then the issue that arises is then LNER and South Eastern and Trans-Pennine, they're also nationalised and they're considered to be some of the best in the country. So, then there was it Trans-Pennine? No, it was Trans-Pennine, yeah. And then the issue and then Ed Miliband spoke. Lovely Ed Miliband, formerly of the Labour Party. Lovely leader of the Labour Party, famous eater of bacon sandwiches. Now he's the current energy secretary. He was big on nuclear power, which I'm quite surprised by. I wasn't green energy, he was looking into more nuclear options, I remember from what he was speaking as. And he did Elon Musk's funny gesture, by mistake, but he raised his arm out, and I was really pissed off I missed a photo of that. Then the next day, at this gala, I met the lovely leader, the lovely chair of East Midlands Young Labour, Ruby Simpson. She was lovely, and I got speaking to her, and I ended up helping her run the Young Labour stand the next day. And I heard a little bit of Wes Streeting speak. He was boring. He was distinctly dull. But one thing I do remember him saying was he said that if Labour doesn't fix the NHS, that's it. Labour's done. If Labour doesn't fix the NHS, then we're done. That's it. And anyone could have told me that. I did not need to pay £40 to go and see that. But then there was the Secretary for Media, Culture and Sports. I forget her name, but she was there. I didn't listen to what she said. I was still working the stand. And then the special guest keynote speaker came out, and it was Rachel Reeves. Rachel Reeves came out, and everyone was really excited, and it was a lot of nothing. It was the same kind of stuff she's been saying for the past 7 months, and with a little sprinkle of defence in Europe at the end. And that was about it. I probably wouldn't choose to go again. But there's some people there I met who are very nice. But there was one point I did notice when I was on the stands, different stand. What happened was I went over to Ruby and I was like, hey, listen, I'm at the Young Labour stand. I have no idea what the fuck I'm talking about. Can you go over and help me? She was like, okay. And she left this stand for Labour to Win abandoned. Now, Labour to Win, from what I gathered from someone who's a lot more qualified than me, this other woman was speaking to someone else about it, and I overheard them. And apparently, Labour to Win is an organisation that plans on trying to organise Labour Party into one set of ideas to try and help win elections more often. And I was thinking about this, and I'm like, but organise it which way? I didn't know what I was campaigning for. Am I campaigning for liberal Blair? Am I campaigning for leftist Attlee? Am I campaigning for centrist, not liberal Blair, liberal Corbyn? Am I campaigning for leftist Attlee? Am I campaigning for centrist Blair and Starmer? I didn't even know what I was trying to do. And eventually I was sat there explaining to people what I was doing without knowing exactly what they wanted me to say. I don't know what Labour Party even is anymore. That's part of the problem. We were talking about this last week. And I talked about this a couple of weeks ago about how Labour Party is so fractionalised. There's always different views because you have the centrists and the leftists. And if Corbyn does what he does and he says he's going to set up a new party next year, then that could be a massive loss to Labour with all the leftists in the party moving over to Corbyn if he sets up this new party, like I've heard.
I mean, you do have to take into account though that this new party that Jeremy Corbyn is trying to found is really just a coalition of pro-Gaza MPs.
Like
It's not really got the intention of actually winning general elections. It's just about targeting specific seats in specific areas in the UK that have maybe more
Muslim population. Because you'll see this with the 2019 election. Around 65% of Muslims voted in favour of Jeremy Corbyn, and Labour had a pretty consistent track record of large numbers of Muslims coming to vote for them. The only reason that the Labour fell off this time around 30-odd%, was because of what was going on in Gaza. So, and Keir Starmer was kind of a weird stance with that.
He was very tentative to actually condemn
Israel or Gaza.
He was
also on the fence.
Yeah,
as most centrists often do. And I ended up also speaking about how, because I remember I was at the Young Labour stand, people kept asking me, it was like, how do we get more young people into the party? There was a question I kept getting asked over and over and over again. And I said, well, I think we need to expand more into social media first of all, not just like Twitter and Facebook. Expand more into TikTok, I think. TikTok's what's probably going to be, that might sound like 40 saying that, but TikTok's going to be the way forward, I think, for political parties. Nigel Farage uses it very well. Ed Davey as well, to a certain extent, he uses it quite well. And then I also think there's a certain personality that is direly lacking within the Labour Party, because I was listening to all these politicians and they were all boring. They were so dull, and with all respect to all these people, they're boring and they have no personality. They're not funny. They're just normal. They're normal politicians, which is something that Nigel Farage knows does not sell. Donald Trump knows it doesn't sell. And because these people, Nigel Farage was originally a stockbroker. Donald Trump was originally a businessman, a reality TV show host. These people know what sells to the youth, right? They know funny sells, personality sells, even to some form of charisma sells. And that's something that's direly lacking in the current Labour Party. And I think that needs to be worked on. So that's all I have to say about my Labour Party conference experience. Lovely people, horrendous speakers. I didn't know what I was supporting. So the first topic we want to get onto is the lovely new German elections. So if you
Shall I start this?
You can start with the voting system, because it's incredibly strange and very unique to Germany. It's something you don't get anywhere else, really.
So, for those of you who weren't actually tethered to your phones, constantly cradled to them, attempting to reload social media pages to find out who won the German election, I think it's important to impart how the German election system works and how It was actually contrived from the context of 1945 and the fall of the Third Reich. So I think we talked about 2 podcasts ago. About how Hitler ascended to power. And fundamentally, he managed to circumvent the sort of shortcomings of the political system at the time. I don't think it was necessarily proportional, but it was based on a coalition-style system, much like it was in Italy from 1919. And in turn, he was able to sort of propagate himself via exploiting all the fallacies within that. To the point where he used to usurp power from Weimar, they fell, he became the Chancellor, and then the Führer. Obviously in 1945, people don't want this anymore. People are disgusted, are abhorred with dictatorships, they want a democracy, and there's such a fractious state of political diversity in this time that it sort of necessitates a system that represents all those diverging views. You can't have a system that sort of constricts and congeals all the views together, because that's also got to create more polarization. So essentially, you get this system called additional member system or mixed member system, and it's actually employed in Scotland and Wales, but not to the same extent. Yeah, so basically, what happens? You get 2 votes, each person gets 2 votes, unlike a normal first past the post system. The first vote is first past the post, so...
Are we a member of the Bundestag?
Sorry?
A member of the Bundestag, it's the
member
of
the Bundestag, yes.
Yeah.
So you get a first past the post vote. The second vote, however, is based on a party list system. So basically you have a long list of all the different parties you can vote for, and basically what you can do with this system is you can vote for an MP of one party and then a different party, so it gives sort of a greater sense of political choice, and it's not sort of constricting you to a party who you may not necessarily agree with. You could actually vote for someone on an individual basis and vote for a party which you generally agree with the sort of political thesis of. So essentially we get this system, but something to add to this is that since 1945 there's been an unwritten rule between the different parties in Germany, who often don't get a majority, obviously because of this type of system, the massive political parties. You don't necessarily manage to get the requisite 316 seats.
316 seats for a majority, yeah.
So often parties have to coalesce, but basically what this sort of unsaid pact is that they never let a far right leaning party into a coalition.
It's called a firewall, isn't it?
It's a firewall. So you get these grand transformismos, but intentionally trying to ostracize and trying to prevent a usurpation of power from these, in some cases, Nazi-inclined groups. Now,
as they love
AFD's ideology is a bit of a haze, really. It's not necessarily clear if they're a neo-Nazi organisation. There's definitely Nazis within that organisation. A lot of people purport that they're just using this sort of legitimate party system to obscure that. But that's not for us to make that assertion, as whether you think they're a neo-Nazi organisation. But like I said, there are certainly members of that disposition.
To clarify their policy stances, a lot of it reside. They I think one of their old, I don't know if it was the actual leader or part of the top ranks. He made some quite anti-Semitic remarks. There's quite a large sense of German nationalism within the party, and a large consensus within the party is that multiculturalism is an abject failure, and that they not that they shouldn't allow illegal immigrants into the country, should not allow any immigrants into the country on any basis.
Obviously this has been perpetuated in recent times because of Angela Merkel and her sort of policy towards immigration that, obviously, famously, she said, let them all in, we can take them all.
Which has led to freedom.
That's created sort of an amorphous mess of contention with immigration policy, which AFD have capitalised on. I think largely AFD aren't a sort of broad church party. Obviously, they're not a broad church party, but they're particularly an immigration party, and they're capitalising on that sort of anti-immigrant ideology.
I did notice when I walked into the co-op to go pick up my copy of The Guardian, I noticed a copy of the Telegraph that was being published that day, and the Telegraph specifically called it an immigration election. That was like how specifically AFD was. And I had a giant picture of Alice Weidel, who's the head of the AFD, on the front waving a German flag like she'd won, even though she came second.
And obviously where they've actually picked up a lot of seats, I know you're going to go into this, is where that anti-immigration rhetoric and that anti-immigration ideology is the highest. There's a complete correlation between that, in spite of the fact that in East Germany, actually, they have the lowest level of immigration.
So
that's
you'll see in
juxtaposition
in West Germany, that's where the largest number of Muslim populations or immigrant populations usually are, compared to the East, where the East is largely just ethnically German. But the East is, shockingly, where the AFD thrives the strongest, compared to the West, where the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats usually.
Well, I think you've harkened back to this before, and it's that notion that typically anti-immigration rhetoric is devolved from economic depravity, economic destitution, and obviously people from that. Some people will be racist and some people will want something to blame, but then some people will subscribe to this idea that obviously Germany has a national health service, or a quasi-national health service, and their main contention is that they've been paying into this system. Why should someone else who's coming from another country be able to reap the rewards of that when they've sort of spent their life efforts paying into a system which they should be able to get the benefits from? I mean, that's the doctrine there. Okay, so in terms of the results for the election, the CDU, which is basically the Conservative Party, the equivalent of our Tory party,
they're centre-right wing.
They're centre-right. So, I don't know, you probably could call them One Nation Conservatives, or between One Nation and New Right.
They're very Christian.
They're obviously socially conservative, so probably veering more to New Right, that neoliberalist doctrine that's really emerged since the 1980s, especially with Thatcher. So they won 208 seats. Now, obviously, that's not a big enough requisite to form a government. The SPD, which are the left-leaning party,
they're like our Labour, and the issue with these people is it was a bit of a Joe Biden situation where Olaf Scholz, he was okay, but people began to grow a bit dissatisfied with him as a leader. Like, he was like, and not in the same vein as Joe Biden, where he's like a complete incompetent who probably has dementia. Like, he didn't do what he really needed to do in order to re-win the election, especially with combating the AFD as well.
So they won 120 seats. So essentially, what's going to happen now is the CDU and the CSU are going to coalesce with the SPD to form that majority government. Now, this is going to have some quite severe political ramifications, because essentially the AFD are the third biggest party in terms of vote share. I'm just checking. I've got
they're the second. They're currently now the second biggest in the Bundestag. This is the first time since 1887, I believe, that the SPD has come third, and it's the worst result since 1887, and it's the first time they've gotten below 20% since 1930, which is the first election. No, 1933, which is it's the 33, 30? One of them, somewhere around there. First election since the early 1930s that they've had less than 20%, which is the one, I think the first ever election that Hitler won as well. So
yeah. So basically what we've got now is AFD, the second biggest party. Now what that's going to do is that's going to create a cyclical structure in which they're not going to be included in government, and that's going to sort of maximalise them and radicalise them more because they're going to purport that the establishment is against them and they're not including them in the political debate, despite the fact that 20.8% of Germans have voted for them. Now, what my problem with some people on the left is that they've been purporting that those 20.8% of Germans are all racists, they're all xenophobes, they all absolutely despise immigrants. I don't think that's true for a large proportion of them. Obviously, there will be racists among those, but that will not actually be indicative of all their demographic.
Yeah. Because you'll see, I remember, I think in the example with the Brits, I think there was a specific example. I remember this guy who's being interviewed, and he used to be like a massive Corbynite, big time. He loved Jeremy Corbyn. Then Nigel Farage comes along and he writes for Reform UK while Jeremy Corbyn's gone. So it's ultimately these people, you'll see this a lot with Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump as well. A lot of people who are big supporters of Bernie Sanders end up defecting to Donald Trump. Because it wasn't the fact that they were just that they really liked left-leaning ideals, it's just they didn't like the establishment and they thought that one option, in the case of Bernie and Trump, the moment Bernie left, they were like, oh, we'll go with the other guy who doesn't like the establishment, which is ultimately Donald Trump. Where Jeremy Corbyn left to go with the other person who doesn't like the establishment, which is Nigel Farage. It's not a racist thing for some people. There sure are racist people within the ranks of Reform UK and the AFD and MAGA, quite obviously. But there are some people in there who aren't racist and are just discontent with the establishment that has failed them time and time again.
But I think it's going to be so multifaceted, the ramifications of this, because essentially what it's going to do now is it's going to entrench those views one of the people who have actually voted for them, and actually they're going to be able to play that line that the establishment is against them, and then they're probably going to. Obviously, the two parties in the coalition now become enfeebled because of their sort of the lack of a majority they actually have. They have a majority, but it's not it's not like huge swathes of Germans came out and voted for them, because they're ultimately going to have a politically contentious term. It's going to be fractious. It's not like they're going to necessarily be able to do a lot because of the dichotomous nature of both the parties' views. The AFD are going to be able to establish to a larger extent that they are the other alternative, because this is the thing with far right or hard right parties or any extremist parties.
There's even populist left. There's a populist left party called the BSW. They didn't do so hard. They were barely upon the 5% threshold.
So if people don't know, the difference between this system and proportional representation and others is that to actually get seats, you have to achieve a 5% requisite, otherwise you're not actually included in any of the seats in the Bundestag.
Was that a rule made this year though? Because I'm seeing here that the really leftist party think not quite Greens in our country, but somewhere between them and Labour. They had 4.9% last time, and they got about 39 seats, and they got 8.8% this time, and now they have 64 seats. Do you think was that a rule put in just this time around? I think it could be.
I'm not sure, unless it's based upon how many seats you got in the first past the post and how many MPs you got in the constituency.
And it's a 5%. It's a 5%. And now this year we know it's a 5% threshold to get a single seat.
Yeah. So. I think if people haven't looked at the cephology of this, and if people don't know cephology, I'm using fancy political jargon now. It's basically the political science of why people voted a certain way. So I think the most interesting data here is the if I can just find it, how people voted based on age. So, and I'm quoting this from
What's that?
this?
DW.com.
DW. Anyway, DW.com. Okay, so essentially what we have here is that the AFD, between 18 and 24 year olds, and 25 to 34 year olds, have their highest demographic, which is weird because you'd think young people being more progressive.
Yeah.
Now,
what I saw was very interesting was I saw this graph that divided the 18-24-year-olds by gender. I noticed there were more women voting for Der Linke, which is a quite left-wing party, not quite as left-wing as the Greens are in our country, but they're still quite liberal left-wing. They were voting more for them, and then the second one was the AFD. Compared to the males, their first choice was more often than not the AFD if they're 18-24, and then it was Der Linke.
But I think pretty much this sort of correlation between being young and voting AFD is sort of conducive to the remembrance culture in Germany, which has ebbed away so much. So basically, these people in that middle age bracket and higher age brackets tend to vote for the more centrist parties or the ones straddling the centre line.
Because there'll often be these people who've either lived through the Nazi regime or who've had parents who lived through it.
Yeah, and normally they're safe hands. You know, you're not going to get any radical reform, whereas AFD are purporting for an extreme change in the political system. And obviously that's what Hitler did. And they've directly experienced that, like you just said. But I think also what you get now is because they're playing the populist card, they do very well on social media. They play into the hands of the youth and really try and accentuate that cult of personality.
Well, obviously, their views are much more extreme than that of Nigel Farage. I talked about this earlier. It's something Nigel Farage plays into a lot. He's quite active on social media, especially on TikTok. A lot of the reform guys, they're quite active on Twitter, especially, and they're posting incessantly. And the one time that they didn't post was when Donald Trump was waffling on about Ukraine. And they did not respond to that immediately, like they always do with literally everything else that ever comes across their desk. But I want to talk about afterwards. I want to talk a little bit about after the election, if you're finished with this.
I just wanted to make a point on gender, so you alluded to that there. So, for the AFD, 24% of men voted for them, whereas 70% of women voted for them. I think it's this notion that the AFD are really playing into traditional values, which obviously nowadays women aren't going to be as receptive to, whereas I think there's sort of a big
thing with men.
There's a big thing with men who want to sort of regain those traditional roles and sort of reinvigorate their masculinity. Obviously, they're playing a lot into that. They're playing into the nationalism, which tends to be an ideology that aligns more with male voters.
Yeah, and it's again a similar thing you saw with the Nazis, and they were like. They thought, women shouldn't wear high heels, they shouldn't wear tights, go back to your old traditional maid dresses, and the boys will go to the Hitler Youth and they'll learn to be proper men, a bit like the Scouts, if you will, but you're Zeke Heiling every 5 seconds. Yeah. But it's a similar thing to that. But I want to talk about the aftermath, and the aftermath is it ends up Friedrich Merz, who is the leader of the CDU, and it's probably going to be next chancellor, because now there's a second round of voting, where the MPs within the Bundestag, they elect the chancellor. Now the issue is then Friedrich Merz, what they do is after the election they hold like a little round table of all the parties and they have a debate after the election about what's going on, and Friedrich Merz, he ends up talking about this thing, and he says this thing, and it depends on the translation of what he says. What he says is he says that either the United States is indifferent to Europe or it doesn't care about Europe. Depending on the translation, that depends on what he's saying, right? But then the issue then arises is then what he goes on to say is he says that the United States has interfered in this election. As I mentioned, Elon Musk by name, he says they've interfered in this election on a scale almost equivalent to that of Moscow, which is an incredibly bold thing to say. And he says that Europe needs more independence from the United States, which, to be fair, he's kind of not wrong. Because basically, there's an unwritten rule in democracy where if there's an election going on, you're a government official, you don't actively support another party, because essentially, if a different party wins, you're going to want to be friendly with the party that wins, not the one you supported. For example, recently, Musk and Vance quite openly supported the AfD, and obviously the AfD hadn't won, so now they're already off to a bad start with the CDU and Friedrich Merz, who very openly oppose the AfD. And then with the independence thing, over the last 80 years, since the Second World War, Europe's defence has entirely been reliant on the United States. Its entire system is fundamentally hinged on the United States. And this has never been an issue until recently with Donald Trump and what he's been waffling on about with Ukraine, which we'll get onto more in a minute.
He did often harken back to it in his first term, though.
Yeah.
With NATO.
Yeah. And the thing is that now there's now a possibility that the United States and Europe might no longer be allies. And now Friedrich Merz is saying, if this is the case, Europe needs to build its own defence, not to combat the United States, but to make sure we aren't entirely dependent on them in case something were to happen.
I think actually, though, to a degree, this plays into Trump's hands, because it's going to create this sort of fractious contention within all European systems, and they're going to have to debate now, other than the issues that pertain to their country individually, whether we should have a European army or some kind of European defence.
Which Vladimir Zelenskyy was suggesting.
And essentially that creates rifts and divisions to a greater extent, which Trump will then be able to capitalise.
But I think Friedrich Merz, he wrote in his book how much he obviously values the transatlantic relationship quite a bit, but he's now realising that might be becoming strenuous because of Trump's actions as of late with the tariff on the EU and his talk about Ukraine and Russia and this UN vote, which we're going to get onto in a minute, and he's worried the United States might not be an ally of Europe for much longer, which he really doesn't want to happen. But if it does happen, we should be ready.
I'm not sure it's that Trump doesn't want Europe to be an ally. It's the fact that he wants them to pay their fair share. Obviously, there's a lot of countries in Europe who are significantly benefiting from the USA's sort of helping hand, really, and they're not actually. They're not essentially paying their requisite amount of taxes, whereas America's pummeling tons and tons of money into defence spending, which is arguably benefited European countries more than it is the USA. So really what he wants them to do is take more responsibility.
The thing is that with the I don't know about that European thing, because since the Second World War, we really had about two major conflicts. We've had the war in like Kosovo, like an actual proper war. I mean, the last one we had was the war in Kosovo, and now we've got the war in Ukraine. Those are the two major ones I can think of off the top of my head, not ignoring all the Cold War standoffs we had in Germany and Berlin, right? But then largely a lot of the United States defense spending has gone overseas into largely since the dawn of the 21st century. And in the 20th century, it largely went into stopping the spread of communism in South America and Asia. And then since 9/11, it's gone largely into counter-terrorism in the Middle East, whether it be Iraq, Afghanistan, and even Iran. And I think the defense spending, obviously, we have quite a bit of defense spending, does go into Europe. And again, Friedrich Merz is worried about that pipeline now that might be threatened because of these tariffs. That's going to essentially cripple the European economy if we are not allowed to export, if the European Union is not allowed to export to the United States. But anyway, so to move on to our next topic, I want to go through this in order because it's such an incredibly strange, series of events that happened with one man, and it's Donald Trump. Right, so the first event that came through was Macron's visit. So Macron, those of you not aware, Macron is the French president. How long has he been president for now? He's not pre-Trump, I don't think, but he maybe the start of it, I think. Let me check.
I believe it could have been before.
No, because I think Trudeau was the last pre-Trump world leader. Emmanuel Macron. He has been president of France since 2017, so he was just a little bit after him, a little bit after Trump starts. Macron, I think he's quite a bit of a centrist as well, but he has a bit more charisma around him.
He tends to lean on the economic right. I think he's quite liberal socialist, especially on some of his climate.
Yeah, but he overall he's a bit of a centrist with his right leanings, but his liberal social views. And he was the second world leader to go visit the White House after Benjamin Netanyahu. And if you remember how Benjamin Netanyahu was treated when he went, it was an incredibly strange experience. When in the Oval Office, he was kind of trying to make the US support Israel more in its efforts in the West Bank. And there was one specific moment I remember was when Benjamin Netanyahu went to go and sit down in a seat, and Trump pulled out his chair for him, which was a bit of a strange move for the President of the United States to be doing to a foreign leader. And what ended up then happening was they talked. I forgot what deal they signed, and they started waffling on about the whole thing in Gaza where Trump was going to own Gaza and that whole thing. And then we all kind of forgot about it. It was weird, but there was a weird lapse of judgment from what we all could tell. Macron comes over and Trump starts his whole waffle about how the US has spent $350 billion in Ukraine, and this is where a little before this he started waffling on about how Zelenskyy was really unpopular and no one likes Zelenskyy. He's only got a 4% approval rating. And then Macron, he grabbed his arm and he was like, no, that's not true. You sent about $170 billion. We sent a little bit more than that. We sent about the same. It's not in loans. And not all of it's in loans. You sent a little bit of loans as well. So what you said there isn't entirely true. And then Macron's visit, largely, to my understanding, it was largely about trying to get security guarantees for Ukraine and negotiating with these EU tariffs, as far as I'm aware. I think.
Yeah, I think really he's playing these two cards of whether they're going to support his deal with Ukraine and sort of how abrasive his tariffs are going to be. Mm-hmm. I think he's sort of berating them to the extent, not berating, oh god, wrong word. Mm-hmm. He's sort of coercing them into aligning themselves with his Ukraine policy, and then at that point he may or may not relinquish tariffs.
Yeah. So then what happened was one specific moment during this meeting there was one moment where there was a very close-up photo of his hand, and there was did you see this? There was quite a large bruise about the size of a child's fist on the back of his hand. And those of you not aware, the most common way that bruise can happen, my dad's a doctor who knows how this happens. Basically what happens is if you're having an IV drip into your hand and the water leaks, that can cause a bruise on the back of your hand. And most famous example recently was with the Queen. When Liz Truss was elected in the Conservative leadership elections, went to go visit the Queen at Balmoral, and she had this bruise on the back of her hand, and Boris Johnson broke protocol, revealed she had bone cancer, and that's most commonly associated with chemotherapy, that IV drip. And everyone was saying, Donald Trump, he might be sick. He might be on an IV drip. Do you want to know what the White House's response to people finding out this bruise on the back of his hand is?
Enlighten me.
What the White House said was, the bruise on the back of President Trump's hand is from him shaking hands with everyone all day, every day. It was this almost like Chairman Mao, the great leader's been shaking hands too much. He's such a great diplomat. It was such a funny thing.
I don't like to compare Trump to dictators, but unfortunately that's very similar to something Mussolini used to do. Mussolini used to leave his light on in his office for 24 hours a day to imply that he's been working all through the night.
Did
For the people of Italy.
Hasn't Elon Musk done the same thing? Like, there's a rumour going around that he's been, like, sleeping on the floor of government departments because he's working so hard. It's such a funny thing to do. And then...
Look at when the cameras come, he just sees it and then falls onto the floor. That's a really cushion out.
Oh no, but there was that. That was Macron's visit. The next visit we have is Keir Starmer. Now Keir Starmer, he had the same objective that Macron had. He was trying to negotiate on tariffs because Trump has implied he may put a tariff on, but he hasn't fully announced it yet. And he's also trying to work on security guarantees for Ukraine. Starmer though has another motive. He wants to get this Chagos deal through. Now the Chagos deal, for those who are not aware, what's happened is the island of Mauritius, who has quite close ties to China, they are requesting that the UK hand over control of the Chagos Islands, as both of them were previously owned by the French, I believe. The Chagos and the Mauritius.
Yeah, they were owned by the French. What the contention is here is that Mauritius doesn't actually have a legal or historical claim over the Chagos Islands.
Yeah.
I mean, the question should be here is what do the Chagosians want?
Yeah.
The impetus should be put on them, and they should be able to decide who has whether they are self-determined or whether another country relinquishes sovereignty.
So the main issue that people are on the other side of the aisle are arguing, mainly Kane Badenoch and Nigel Farage, are saying, this is undermining British sovereignty, and we should claim it back for the sake of our British pride. And I think there's other arguments to be made, largely the fact that there is a military base that the UK is lend-leasing to the United States, and if you get Mauritius involved with its ties to China, that gets very complicated very quickly. And the rumour is that Starmer was trying to rush out the Chagos deal before Trump came to power because he believed that Trump would not accept it. Turns out at this meeting he did. And also at this meeting, he was asked by a journalist would he still call Zelenskyy dictator. And Trump, there is a tweet of Donald Trump calling Zelenskyy dictator, and he's gone, well, I never said that. I can't believe I never say that. That's ridiculous. I never say that. Like, there's proof of him saying this. There's multiple times he's called Zelenskyy dictator, and also he's just gone, no, never said this. What do you mean?
Weird, because it was sort of like he was, I don't know if there was a bit of sarcasm there or a bit of failed comedy, but I don't know.
No, because the thing was
surely he can't be that deluded to think he hasn't called Zelenskyy as dictator.
The thing was, because that was on Thursday, right? On Tuesday, with Macron, he said that, like, when he was asked a very similar question, he said, I do not use those words lightly. And it was like, which one is it? Is he did you call him a dictator and you really mean it? Or did you not say it at all? Make up your fucking mind. It's been 2 days. The large reason that they're saying that he is a dictator is because he hasn't held elections. Well, first of all, we didn't hold elections in 1935 to 1945 because of the Second World War. And second of all, he's not allowed to. The Ukrainian constitution says that if Ukraine is in a wartime, they can't hold an election. That's not Zelenskyy.
It's been under martial law since 2020.
It's been under martial law since the invasion, and that is in the Ukrainian constitution. Zelenskyy has to do that. That's not Zelenskyy's choice. That is the constitution that says that's what you have to do. It's not Zelenskyy's choice in any capacity. And then there's two more things that happened before things went down the absolute shitter. Right? The three more things. First of all, Starmer announced a defence increase.
So essentially what Labour's done now is, despite promising in their manifesto to keep defence spending at the same level, they've now increased it from 0.7% to 1%.
No, it's 2.5% now. 2.5%.
No, 2.5% is the aim. They've increased it to 1%.
Oh.
Yeah. So it just seems that there's more and more just compounded onto this already inauspicious start of the Labour Party, if you can call them a Labour Party, this fucking quasi-wibbly wobbly, disjointed, discombobulated, congealed mess of a Labour Party.
Yeah.
Who essentially purport to be bastions and totems for the deprived, the destitute. But they're not. Simply Mr. Meagher, Mr. Nebula and Vascuousness has no idea about the real working man. And all he's doing now, all this tells me is that he's gutless, and all he's doing, he's becoming a minion of Trump's, essentially. He's becoming usurped by Trump. He's succumbing to Trump. He has no defined political ideology. He's willing to put our men on the front lines without any consideration of the ramifications of that for the actual men or women going to fight. He's just willing to use us as conduits for his own political preservation and amelioration.
I'd have to agreeably disagree with you here. I think if this was any other circumstance, I'd 100% agree with you. I'd be all over that, right? But my issue resides in the fact that this is such, as you would say, it's a quite tumultuous time. Because we're currently in a situation where there was this UN vote that was passed, about this is part of this, where there was a UN vote to condemn Russia for the war, so it was a war of Russian aggression, and the US voted alongside Russia, North Korea. This is unprecedented. Even China abstained from this vote. Right? We're in such a time where Friedrich Merz, this is what he was on about. He was on about when he bought independence from the United States. If Starmer has to increase defense, I don't agree with what he cut. He cut international aid, but I think we do need more defense spending for not just the defense of our island, but for the defense of Ukrainian sovereignty and potentially the fate of Eastern Europe and maybe the entirety of Europe as a whole. And I think ultimately, again, in any of those circumstances, I agree with you. This is the same view I have with Jeremy Corbyn. James cleverly said this. I don't think 2.5% is enough, and I don't think that by 2027 is soon enough. It needs to be 3%, and it needs to be now. I think that's what has to happen, because 2027. By that point,
gutless. It's not like it's going to be the top 1% who pay that. It will be the people who will most likely
absolutely
going to be conscripted.
Absolutely.
And my problem is that he's offering us up as sort of cannon fodder before an actual peace deal has actually been finalised. He's saying, I will place troops on the eastern border in Ukraine, and we don't even know if that's going to be a part of the deal. He's actively offering the UK citizens to Ukraine. And now people might think that's necessary, but I he needs to, before trying to employ his political opportunism, he needs to see what's going to happen with this deal, and not just offer us up haphazardly.
I can see why he'd do that before the deal, but considering how the deal then went, I think we can discount that. But I first of all want to talk about Trump's video that he posted to his Truth Social and his Twitter. Have you seen this?
I have not seen that.
This lovely little AI-generated video that Donald Trump posted to his Twitter.
I have seen that.
You have seen it?
Yeah, I know.
So what happens is, basically, this video is about Trump's plan for Gaza, which we all forgot about. And it's very weird. It's an AI-generated video of, basically, it starts off with these clips of the Israeli army in the decimated land of Gaza. And it's like, what do we do now? And then it cuts to this happy-go-lucky, enthusiastic billionaire resort. Trump and Netanyahu are on sun lounges. Elon Musk is throwing out money. And it has these lyrics in the background about how Trump's going to save Gaza as well. Probably also an AI-generated song. One thing that really stood out to me was a golden statue of Donald Trump. And that was mental to me, because I wonder really how all the evangelicals are going to react to Trump suggesting he should put a giant golden statue in the Holy Land, which isn't that literally a story from the Bible? The story of the golden calf after Moses saves all the Jews from Europe, and then he goes out to the burning bush, and then meanwhile the Jews, they build a statue of a golden calf, and God's like, hey, listen, they're not listening to me, they're betraying your commandments, go and make them eat the gold. True story. And it's just, that's nuts. That's incredibly nuts to me, the fact that he just...
My problem is, even if he meant it in a sarcastic and sort of satirical tone, because obviously he didn't make this video, he just shared it from people who created this.
With AI, yeah.
It is reductive to the immense amount of hardship and deprivation, destitution these people are undergoing at this point. Whether you agree with Gaza or Israel or whichever side you take, people are suffering on both sides. I just think it's slightly trivial to post this, especially in such a tumultuous and fractious time.
And then,
even if it was meant sarcastic.
And then the final thing I want to get onto is this absolute clusterfuck that was the meeting with Zelenskyy. Now, what happens is, okay, so Macron and Starmer, obviously they've been doing their talks with Zelenskyy. They a part of it is the security guarantees. And the two security guarantees that Ukraine wants, they want EU membership and they want NATO membership. Those are the two things that they really want. And in exchange, they want Russia at least out of the territory that they have taken since 2022, and maybe even out of Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea as well. Then,
I think it's also conducive to the fact that Zelenskyy, I don't think, wants to relinquish any land at all. I mean, that was the contention here, that Trump was purporting that they should be grateful.
So, we're going to go on to that. So then Trump has obviously called him a dictator, and he's backpedaled on this. And Macron and Starmer were trying to negotiate the security guarantees for Ukraine. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin, what he wants even more territory than what he's already taken. He wants Zelenskyy out of office immediately. He wants the entire dismantlement of the Ukrainian army, and basically wants to just cripple Ukraine as much as he can. And he wants sanctions lifted on Russia as well. Then the issue arises in the fact Zelenskyy visited the White House to try and finalize a deal. Now, part of this deal, Donald Trump, he wants $500 billion from Ukraine. And some of that is also coming in the form of natural resources, most of which largely reside in the eastern part that Russia has conquered. And in exchange, Volodymyr Zelenskyy is basically getting square root fuck all. He may be getting security guarantees, we don't know, at this point. We don't even know he's getting any money in exchange. The only thing that he's got in exchange so far is about $175 billion in American weapons, which again is about the same amount that Europe's been giving. And Zelenskyy visits, and everything's fine. Everything's largely fine. So basically what they do is the foreign leader meetings usually go like this. They usually arrive at the West Wing door, they have a chat in the Oval Office in front of all the press, then they go into a private meeting, and then they come back out and they essentially debrief the press in the meeting, the press conference. This first press conference, however, went off the rails. What happens is at the start, you're meant to have about 2 or 3 questions each. What happens is at one point, this Polish reporter asks Trump, and he says the United States has a lot of troops deployed in Eastern Europe, and how come you're aligning yourself with Russia and Putin so much? And Trump goes, well, I'm not aligning myself with Russia and Putin, I'm aligning myself with the United States. And then he starts saying to try and benefit the United States and the world, and then he starts kind of saying that Zelenskyy has an attitude problem about Russia. He says like, I can't get this guy to negotiate with Putin because he fucking hates Putin. That's a problem. And I'm sure that they're the same way about him on the other side.
Yeah, basically saying Zelensky's essentially gambling with...
No, this is later. That doesn't happen yet.
Okay.
That doesn't happen yet. Then Vance comes out, and this fully solidified me that Vance is a genuinely horrible human being. Right? Vance then comes out, interjects. Reporters trying to ask the question. Vance goes, no, I want a second response to this. And Trump goes, yeah, sure. And Vance says, and he says that Joe Biden speaking aggressively on Putin got Ukraine invaded. And he says that diplomacy is the only way forward in Ukraine. And Zelenskyy goes, no, hang on a second. You've entirely discounted the years between 2014 and 2022. Well, no one stopped Putin when he was killing in Donetsk and Luhansk and Crimea between 2014 and 2022. There was a ceasefire agreement, and Putin did not obey that ceasefire agreement. And he mentioned there was a 1990 ceasefire deal with Merkel and Macron, and that was broken. So he believes that now Russia is not willing to accept diplomacy, because obviously there's this previous diplomatic agreement, and they said no, and they haven't followed through with it. And then eventually, Vance starts just yelling at Zelenskyy, starts calling you ungrateful and shit. And then Vance says, he goes on the offensive and he accuses him of going on a propaganda tour and not portraying both sides of the story in the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And then Zelensky goes, okay. Zelensky tries to stay calm here, and he goes, okay, let me answer these questions one at a time. And he starts going through them, and then he says America doesn't largely get the impact of a war because they have large oceans between most of their enemies. And then Trump, and this is when Trump starts getting into the fray. He starts yelling at Zelensky. He says he's ungrateful. He says he's gambling in people's lives. He's gambling with World War III, and he's disrespectful to the American people. And it was like genuinely, it's nothing. It's unprecedented. There's absolute shouting. If
this had to be done, it should have been done in a private place.
Yeah,
not in public.
Alistair Campbell.
Alistair
Campbell was talking about this. The only thing he's closest seen of this was in a private setting when Putin lost his rag with Tony Blair once. Nothing like this in public has ever been seen. It's ludicrous. This kind of offensive attack from the President of the United States is so unprofessional. And then
the problem is, whether he actually meant to fully condemn Zelensky, what it's doing now is he's going to align himself inadvertently or overtly with Putin. It's going to give the impetus to Putin and the sort of the podium for political for debating the deal.
And then there was one really interesting point where when JD Vance said, "Have you actually even thanked us?" And Zelensky was like, "I've thanked you multiple times." And Vance like, no, have you thanked us in this meeting? The first thing Zelensky did as he walked in, he said, "Thank you to President Trump. Thank you to the American people." I think these people are just deaf, and this is like I have a feeling as though this might have been intentionally staged, because I think it might have been Trump's reality TV brain from The Apprentice going off the back of his head. He knows if he wants good TV and he wants good ratings, if you want to get good ratings, you need conflict, right? So he may have intentionally manufactured this conflict. I don't even know, but even if he didn't, that's insane. If he did or he didn't, that's nuts. That should be incredibly nuts either way.
I think he's really trying to propagate that America will not be contended with.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden, instead of doing what you usually do, you usually say, okay, listen, fellas, we've done this now. Let's move on to something else. Let's go to a private meeting. He called in another journalist just to ask him more questions, and he yelled even more. And it's incredibly unprofessional. And then they went into the private meeting, and they spoke for about an hour. And then Marco Rubio asked Zelensky to leave the building. The press conference afterwards did not happen. It did not happen. And Trump immediately went onto Twitter and started calling him disrespectful, and Zelensky doesn't want peace. And it was just a strange thing to see. It was nuts. Like, this is unprecedented. Nothing like this has ever happened. Not even in the history of the United States, in the history of diplomacy ever.
My problem was as well, with the logic Trump was using, it was sort of like, there was a logical fallacy there, because it was basically saying that Russia would have completely obliterated Ukraine
in 2 weeks.
Taken it in 2 weeks.
And then Zelensky responded.
Wants to relinquish funding. So is that not a contradiction?
And then Zelensky kept on saying, when he said that, Zelensky was like, well, I've heard three days from Putin. Why am I hearing 2 weeks from you? It's 3 days, is it 2 weeks? What is it? And then it's just so bizarre. It's incredibly strange. And ultimately, Trump and Vance's outburst here has meant that Starmer's and Macron's efforts are for nothing. The security guarantee has gone out the window. They're not going to join NATO. They can't join NATO at this point, because if US is the leader of NATO, essentially, right, that's not going to happen. So, I think that's all we have time for this week, unfortunately.
I think so.
I think that's all we have time for. I would love to go into it more, but unfortunately we have run out of time. But we'll see you next week, when hopefully Donald Trump does not kick off another world leader on national television. We'll see you then. This has been Playground Politics, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Bye.